It's very exciting to be hosting already the 22nd Transformational Change Learning Partnership working session. This one is, I think, particularly important for us because it definitely showcases how transformational change is being taken in multiple multilateral climate funds, and how we're trying also to constantly align our work for a bigger transformational intent. We are very excited to have today with us Scott Chaplow. He's an evaluation strategy and capacity development specialist who will be speaking about the JEF's IEO new analytical framework that's been used by the JEF. We also have Geeta Bartra, who's currently leading the independent evaluation office at the JEF. We're very excited to have you both here today. But I think just to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, just with the objective of us being able to share at least the beginning of the presentations and the initial thoughts that we're going to be sharing in the event's website. But without further ado, Scott, over to you.
Okay, well, I'm going to move beyond our title slide here. And actually, Geeta is going to start off by introducing the session.
Thanks, Alfredo. Thanks, Scott. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you who have joined us, and exciting to be part of the TCLP webinar series again. So I'm Geeta, as Alfredo said. I'm the Director of Independent Evaluation at the JEF Independent Evaluation Office. In case some of you don't know, the JEF is the largest multilateral environmental financing partnership established in 1992 and currently going through its 9th replenishment process. It's disbursed over $26 billion in grants and raised about $148 billion in co-financing over 5,000 projects since inception. Now, why is transformational change actually important in the JEF? JEF has traditionally, Scott, if you want to go to the next slide, please. So basically, JEF works in a number of focal areas because it's the financial mechanism for different UN conventions: Convention on Biological Diversity, the Climate Convention, UN to combat desertification, etc. But more recently, and I think since about 10 to 12 years ago, it has started shifting the focus from single focal areas to integrated programs like food systems, forest biomes, sustainable cities, etc., because it realizes, and JEF realized, that it's important to undergo to get transformational change, you've got to be using a more integrated approach. Next slide, please. Yeah, these are some, we thought we'd put this at the beginning because this session actually draws on some of these recent publications. There's the report that we did on an evaluation of JEF support for transformational change. There's the transformational change for people and the planet based on a workshop and a conference that we did a couple of years ago. It's got a variety of papers from seasoned evaluators and young evaluators. And the last publication with Scott actually helped us work on and pull together, as you know, all the Adaptation Fund, the Climate Investment Fund, the JEF, and the GCF have been working on transformational change. And so this last one there is a recent publication that Scott helped us put together. Next slide, please. So I think what sets the stage is that we've seen that all environmental domains are interrelated, right? Be it biodiversity, climate change, land degradation, etc. As well as, and the SDGs set the stage for this a few years ago, showing the links between environment as well as socioeconomic domains. And this is what underpins a lot of our work on transformational change, looking at interventions as part of a system that works across environmental domains as well as across environmental and socio and economic domains. Next slide, please. And that, as Scott is going to get through the theory underpinning some of our work, transformation requires a systems approach. And I'm sure you all have heard the word systems, etc. What does it mean? It means gravitating from a linear theory of change to a more comprehensive theory of change, looking at transformational change as it happens, not at a project level, but more at a portfolio level, a systems level, a country level, etc. And all this requires evaluators also to think a little differently. You can't evaluate a project in isolation. You need to clearly define the system's boundaries, otherwise you'd be going too wide. So in our current work on transformational change, so it doesn't stop, right? We keep learning as we go also. And this is where Scott's been helping us recently in redefining and reassessing our work on transformational change. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to him to give you about how we are looking to address transformational change. What are some of the factors we're going to keep in mind? Addressing transformational change not only at the end of a project to see was it a transformational project or a transformational program, but how can one embed a lot of this at the beginning of a project or a program to see whether projects or programs are actually on the path to transformational change. So Scott will start with some basic definitions, etc., because there's a wide spectrum of definitions out there, and then get into some of the details underpinning what we're thinking, our recent thinking, and then I'll come back with a few examples on transformational change. Thanks, and over to you, Scott.
Scott, you're muted. Scott, you're muted. Scott, we cannot hear you. You're muted.
The old mute trick. Thanks. Yeah, I think many people in the TCLP community will be familiar with transformational change and how it can be defined. But we also know that there might be people attending this call who are not. So we just briefly wanted to look at how transformational change is defined. And I think the key lessons are, one, it's a human concept. And as such, there's not one definitive industry-wide definition. I've got 4 of them showing here, one from 2012 from the IPCC, then GEFS from their pioneering evaluation in 2018. Then from the TCLP partnership in 2021, and then a recent article in 2024 from Buckton et al. I think it reflects the urgency and interconnectedness of the times. For the first time in human history, the challenges we face demand a planetary response. So there's a big emphasis on systems and changing systems. The TCLP definition resonates most with me, maybe because I'm biased and I've been in the group for a while, but the TCLP consists of 1,100 people from around 350 organizations that help to develop that definition. So I see it as a good cornerstone for a generic definition. The other, but what's important is, regardless of the generic definition, as SIF has done, it's grounded it in its own organizational context. And as GEF has done, and the definition I'm showing here grounds it in its organizational context. For example, GCF and SIF work in climate change and climate action, climate mitigation and adaptation, whereas GEF, I think, has a broader remit, including biodiversity, pollution, other elements as well, stressing what they call global environmental benefits and whole of society engagement. So whatever generic and definition you springboard off of, it's important to ground it institutionally for the work that will be done. The other key thing to keep in mind about the definition of transformational change is it goes beyond business as usual. It's a recognition that, as the next slide here shows, that changes it's beyond incremental. It's not optimizing performance within the existing system. It's not reformist, modifying the existing systems to enhance results. It's shifting to a completely different system, a fundamental system. Sometimes the term paradigm shift is used. So, some of the key insights from the publications, and more, much more than the three key publications Geeta shared, that I wanted to just go through quickly on the evaluation of transformational change, is one, transformational change unfolds non-linearly over time. A flat early trajectory is not a failure. It can take decades for transformational change to manifest. And at the same time, when the tipping point is reached, it can happen very quickly as well. Take the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. It took a long time, and then when that tipping point happened, things started changing quickly. Transformational change is systemic, not projectized. It requires a portfolio level thinking, which Geeta shared in her slide earlier, with coordinated interventions in their evaluation. Contribution takes precedence over attribution. It doesn't mean you throw out the possibility of counterfactuals and stuff when they're appropriate. But when you're looking at systems change, contribution analysis is going to be more important. Rather than linking the outcomes to a single intervention, you need to look at the myriad of different actors and factors that can contribute to systems change. Mixed methods, no single method is sufficient. Using various, quantitative, qualitative methods, getting different perspectives. Number 5, many people sometimes lose sight of this, particularly given this, what I showed here, incremental on the left, transformation on. And this is something I found with the adaptation funds work came out for me, is incremental change is very legitimate building blocks for transformational change. Smaller, well-designed interventions can equally catalyze larger change. Transformational intent and actual contribution is not the same thing. For example, with the GEF, projects need to identify whether or not they're going to have a transformational change focus when they're submitted as a proposal. But when evaluating a portfolio, whether a project said it's aiming for transformational change or not, okay, that project can have a different degree of contribution to transformational change. Even if transformational change wasn't identified as a strategic objective, it can still contribute to that. For example, building social cohesion and capacity for sustaining systems change. And even though a project can identify transformational change, doesn't necessarily mean that that intent is going to manifest in transformational change. And the last point is just that risks and transformational change are inseparable. It requires a risk appetite and adaptive management. And failures aren't necessarily failures unless you fail to learn from them. So there's a lot of pivoting and trying and piloting and prototyping that's often involved. Innovation is often part of that. So this is the summary slide on the framework. And as you see, there's 2 key components. One is the GEF's existing evaluation criteria, which are primarily the 6 OECD DAC criteria complemented by the GEF-specific inclusion criteria, number 7 at the bottom, okay? The value of these criteria is that they're most widely adopted in international evaluation framework for evaluating development and environmental interventions. So it provides a normative architecture. For example, SIF also works with them as well. But this is not to say that the criteria do not have its limitations. There's been, for example, a big critique of the sustainability criteria, focusing more on the extent to which the intervention goals or predetermined results are sustained versus the consequences on the larger social and natural systems. This is something Michael Quinn-Patton has written about in an article in 2019 and others. And the OECD itself acknowledges this gap. On its webpage, it states that the criteria are not particularly useful tool for descriptive analysis of transformational change or systems change. And their own guidance, the OECD guidance, encourages flexibility in how the criteria are used. Okay, so that said, well, what we've got on the left are the attributes that we have identified, having worked with TCLPs, 5 dimensions, and a variety of other frameworks that are used. These are the attributes that we felt are fit for purpose for the GEF context. And I'm going to take a deeper dive into them, but I think the key thing to keep in mind about the attributes is they provide, rather than replacing the criteria, they function more as a transformational change lens that's supposed to orient evaluation attention towards systemic, relational, and transformational dimensions. And it builds on the institutionally adopted criteria that the GEF agencies and partners already know, okay? But 3 caveats. One is they are more permissive or flexible than prescriptive. The attributes themselves should be adapted to the evaluation context, which includes the evaluand, purpose, and capacity. 2, the correlation that you're seeing is not the first attribute goes to the first criteria. Transformational intent, all the attributes can appear in any of the criteria based on the context, and I'll talk about that shortly. So just although the diagram may make it look like it's a one-to-one, on the right, the attributes are basically mapped on as appropriate to the criteria, okay? And the third piece here is the attributes are very much interconnected, okay? They are, for example, you can have, the inclusive human agency. Number 3 is very important for integration. It's also very important for regenerative system sustainability. We can find lots of other examples as well. So the TC attributes, in a way, walk the system's talk in that they themselves are interrelated and there's overlap and that's fine, okay? So I'm going to quickly take you through the attributes. The vision was to do like a minute a slide. We'll see. We're kind of running tight on time because we started a little late. But transformational intent is to what extent or what evidence shows that the intervention moves beyond incremental change to something, business not as usual, fundamental change. And as you can see from the bullets, there are different considerations when you're looking at the transformational intent. And what we're doing with the GEF is we're creating a guidance that uses these things to inform prompts for evaluation questions that can be tailored for different evaluations. Integration is to what extent is the intervention integrated not just within the GEF, but also externally with external partners and even if they're not necessarily partners, but they're key stakeholder groups that need to be thought about and navigated for the success of the intervention. And this aligns a lot with GEF's concept of whole of society coordination. Inclusive human agency. So this one is critically important in systems work, because one of the first things you need to do is put boundaries around the system, and who's involved in that process in itself is a power-laden exercise. So thinking about power and how it's distributed, gender, equitable, equitability, structural equity, rights-based participation, all that stuff is bounded by this particular attribute. Agile speed pretty much lifts from the TCLP's dimensions. We put agile onto it because it needs to be flexible over speed. And we also add that it needs to be realistic to existing resources, capacities, and constraints. Okay. And there's a commitment to just transition, because transitioning, particularly in climate work, but not just climate work, other things where you're phasing out people's livelihoods for a more renewable or sustainable livelihood, there's importance to be thinking about social transition and employment. Scalability is key. I think it's probably one of the most common things I've seen across frameworks for transformational change. And there's different types of scalability. There's horizontal scaling geographically and demographically out. There's vertical scaling up into institutions, policies, regulations, whether or not those regulations are being enforced. There's scaling deep into mindsets, values, cultural norms. There's also functional scaling. To what extent does the intervention actually adapt in its function? Innovation scaling. So scaling is a very critical part of the transformational change framework. And then, of course, systematic change. Now, scaling happens a lot it could happen a lot underneath the effectiveness criteria. Are you effectively rolling out and scaling? But when all is said and done, to assess impact, what's been the actual scale out, which is like the fourth bullet here? How far did it reach? Did it occur? Has the system generally moved? Was it transformational? How far did it reach? Who contributed to it? Benefits and burdens and so forth. And then the last one goes a bit beyond the conventional sustainability to ask whether the systems is self-reinforcing and capable of renewal. And that's a lot of the intention that's increasing in the industry on regenerative evaluation. Systematic change, whether the observed shifts are durable, adaptable, and resistance to reversal. Okay, so this just gives you a snapshot of how primary relevant attributes align with the evaluation criteria. Keep in mind, you might have an evaluation where you have an attribute that isn't reflected for a criteria you feel should be. And that's because the attributes are meant to be adapted to evaluation context and evaluand. But for example, take agile speed with efficiency. You can kind of see how that would go there, okay? Inclusive human agency is very important for relevance, but it's also important for impact and sustainability. And then, of course, inclusion. So you can see that these attributes often overlap and complement each other. And the vision is to address this in the specific evaluation questions that would be probing for each evaluation criteria. And my last slide is first up top, showing a kind of, I would say, industry accepted diagram of the 4 key phases of transformational change, from pre-development, takeoff, acceleration, and stabilize. And then I'm just showing you real quickly a way some of this can be measured by using a rubrics approach. Okay, and it's very illustrative. But on the left, you have a transformational vision statement. And then when you're rating the intervention, you can rate at what stage, because the top half of this is really often used in organizational maturity as well, where an organization is. This is more the maturity of a initiative, transformational change. And you can use rubrics to rate where an intervention is. And there's a lot of other ways to use rubrics. You can use it for each attribute. You can build on this, and the rubrics has the advantage of it creates a transparent way to be thinking about these things. All right, I'm going to now turn it back over to Geeta. Thank you for your patience. I feel like I ripped through a lot of things quickly there, but Geeta, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. So should we go to the previous real quick?
You good?
So this was, so how do we know, and I think there've been a couple of questions, how do we know that transformational change has actually taken place, right? This is not something easy to measure. Embarked on this exercise, we did it retrospectively, right? So we sent a memo to all the 18 agencies that comprise the implementing agencies of the GEF. And we said, what do you think are projects that you are proud of that were transformative in your opinion? And we kind of gave them a rough rubric. A rubric along the lines, not as sophisticated as what Scott has mentioned, but we came up with an initial idea. And we looked at relevance, internal factors, outcomes, contextual conditions, sustainability, ambition level, and focus. And because there were several others like the World Bank and other evaluation units that had already established a theory behind transformational change. So we thought, let's apply this in the context of GEF projects. And it was interesting. We got about 140 nominations from different agencies, and we kind of put them through a ringer, right? We said 140 transformative. Let's see if these actually meet the test along these different dimensions. Next slide, please. So we did come up with a few. Wind power in Uruguay had changed the market for energy efficiency in Uruguay, and the results were outstanding. Increased by 33% usage in wind power, but it was also accompanied by changes in regulations. In Africa, Lighting Africa transformed the market there. In the Amazon, we saw the number of protected areas go up. China, energy efficiency. This was a really interesting project because it really transformed the market through regulation, through financial institutions participating, through micro, small, and medium enterprises entering the industry, and really transformed the entire market for renewable energy. And the same thing with Namibia. So we kind of saw examples that told us that transformational change had happened in the GEF. We backtracked from there and said, so what are the conditions under which transformational change actually happens? Next slide, please. So all this has implications for evaluation, right? One has to take a holistic view. You're looking at the entire sector. You're looking at the system within of influencing factors. Country context, regional context, policy context, institutional context, all that matters. You need a systems lens to address this. You're looking at the factors and drivers of transformation in light of the policies of the institution. And Scott was alluding to this, where he mentioned you've got to look at inclusion. Inclusion is a big deal in the GEF. There's a big policy on stakeholder engagement, inclusion, gender. So you've got to keep in mind the policies of the organization, and the projects are expected to follow these policies, and these are instrumental in transformational change, right? You've got to look at integration between human and natural systems. And if COVID taught us anything, or the SDGs have alluded to this, there is a strong link between human and natural systems. And you've got to look at these. Gone are the days where you can look at environmental projects in isolation, or you look at just development projects in isolation, right? And finally, you've got to use both quantitative and qualitative approaches to measure transformation. And Scott's alluded to this. We are increasingly using geospatial data to understand context, right? Where is this intervention occurring? We're not using techniques for their own sake. It's to understand the broader country, regional, and the landscape within which these environmental interventions are taking place. We're also linking that data with socio and economic data and health data that are available from, country surveys or surveys from the MDBs, etc. So at the end of the day, we're interested in knowing not only has change occurred, but how sustainable has the change been. Because one thing we found, whether it's the GEF or you look at broadly across MDBs, UN agencies, etc., outcomes are generally achieved because in the evaluation context, and as Scott's referred to OECD DAC, we do objectives-based evaluation, right? So we're looking to see if project objectives have been achieved. Projects are typically, no board is going to approve a project that is not relevant. So you find very high degrees of relevance. The question is, does it stay relevant over time? Because it takes 7 to 8 years to implement these projects. Then you've got to look at sustainability, and sustainability coming in, and somebody asked this question, who goes out and checks this? Yes, this is a big deal for donors to know whether the interventions being financed by them are actually sustainable over time. And we do go out and do post-completion verifications, at least on a handful of projects that fall under our thematic evaluations, about 5 to 6 years past closure. Have there been demonstration effects? It's not about Jeff doing everything. There could be other funds that are scaling it up. But is there a transformational change? And this is where Scott was referring to. There are other partners that can pick up on the innovations you have piloted and tested and therefore scale them up over time, right? But is this happening? It's only about the Jeff intervention and Jeff scaling it up. No, Jeff may not have the funds to scale it up, but it's somebody else doing it. So what is the sustainability? And this is a challenge. You typically find sustainability rates between 65 to 70%. You find outcomes about 79 to 85%, right? So there is this difference and there is this gap because a lot happens between implementation and final results on the ground. And that's why we see transformational change also as a process. It's not a state you've achieved. It is a process that happens over time. It's hard to say, well, this is now transformed, because what is it that you're looking to transform? It could be a process. It could be a policy reform, which takes a long time. So that's fundamental too. Next, please. So the reason I'm stressing a lot on a systems lens is because increasingly, and as part of Jeff replenishment processes, we do something called a comprehensive evaluation every 4 years. And I would invite you to look at the 8th comprehensive evaluation, which is all about integration for greater impact. And it is about, and you're looking at, nothing happens in a system, things happen which are very linked. You have innovation. You've got inclusion to look at. You've got to look at risk taking. You've got to look at the additionality of the interventions. You've got to look at the synergies and the trade-offs. Intended, unintended are standard evaluative practice. And you've got to look at integration design and outcomes across environmental domains as well as across environmental and socioeconomic domains. In other words, you've got look at projects and programs operating in a transformative has a queen or an institution, all these for us, innovation as to assess in the Jeff, because if you're not taking enough risk, is transformational change actually going to be possible without taking risk? If you're going to do the same bread and butter projects, which will give you the guaranteed 80 to 85% outcome that you're looking for, is that going to be the envelope on transformational change? So risk, innovation, inclusion, all these are really important factors, and therefore evaluation also has to account for all these when you're looking at projects and program performance. I think that's the last slide, right, Scott?
Yeah. Yeah, just be aware for just a little bit there, Geeta, you froze. So I don't know if it's going to happen again. You can always turn off your video or something.
Yeah. No.
You just froze for a little. I think your main message still came across.
Yeah. Okay. I see a couple of comments. Are we ready to take some of these comments, or are we waiting?
Absolutely.
I'm done with the presentation. We can take
Per-
questions now.
Perhaps. Yes, absolutely. I was just going to complement something that Mike asked to say, which is the SIF has also been very eager in using transformational change within their evaluations, within our evaluations. And we've been doing it through the PPCR evaluation, which is our resilience portfolio. We've been doing it through our forestry investment portfolio, and we're also using some of our latest clean technologies portfolio, which aligns a lot with the work that Ida has been mentioning. It considers, in our case, what we're calling emerging and advanced signals of transformation, and we tried to innovate and try to look for contribution in rather than attribution necessarily to the different processes. But I do know that we have 17 more minutes, so I don't want to take longer, and I think it'll be better for us to go straight into the questions. I've seen that Scott has already answered a lot of them. So let me see if perhaps any of you feel comfortable to raise your hand or to unmute and introduce yourselves and do some of the questions to both Geeta and Scott.